Don't always remember, but I
Well, I
do.
forgot last time, so. But it's great to see some of the same faces. A few people who are going to be in our cohort as well. Welcome. Okay. Looks like we got a lot of people here, and I know for some of you it might be around lunchtime, so feel free to put your screens on, uh, turn your screens off, put yourselves on mute, and really, dig into some lunch and learn here. Also, lunch and share maybe. And yeah, we're just very happy to be back for our second installment of the year. Hope people are still enjoying the music. Okay. Got some notes that the music was a little loud, so hopefully now people can hear me better. Thumbs up. Okay, great. Okay, well, welcome everybody. I think we should go ahead and get started. How's everybody feeling? Is everybody ready to get rolling here on a Wednesday? Okay. Well, welcome again, everybody. We're glad to have you here for our second community roundtable of the year. Getting the answers you need, designing surveys and interviews through an equity lens. We have a great workshop and roundtable and solution rooms planned for you today, and look forward to discussing more about this topic. At this time, I'd like to just make sure that everybody has the chat accessible, that you're able to access it. And if you can, go ahead and put your name, your organization, pronouns. We want to know where you're coming from, and please include your land acknowledgement. And let us know what brings you here today. What do you hope to get out of this session? What are you feeling is present, and how you want to show up and learn today? And then again, any accessibility needs that you want to share with us, please feel free to turn off your mic at this time, or let us know in the chat if you'd like to just, and I also want to make sure that everybody can see the shared screen. So please let us know if if you're having any issues with the chat or the shared screen. Thank you. I see some names coming into the chat right now. Welcome, welcome. Once again, uh, who are we? We are rooted. And as we like to say, we lead with our values here at Rooted. And what are those values specifically? We believe and we're rooted in equity. So we start with anti-racism, then equitable access to opportunities and resources. We also believe in partnership through listening and building trust, community-led breakthroughs, fearless curiosity, and finally, but not least importantly, health and healing. We want to make sure that we're showing up and being our full selves in these moments and prioritizing what we need to do this work and support our communities. So outside of that, a little bit more about who we are individually. We have our team here, our beautiful team that's spread across the country, but very rooted in community. And what we want to do is highlight a few members who are specifically here today. Myself, my name is Marcus Sinkay Harris. I'm Director of Community Engagement here at Rooted, and my pronouns are he, him. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to one of my co-facilitators, Val Newmark.
Hey everyone, my name is Val. My pronouns are she, they. I'm the Director of Strategy here at Rooted, and I reside on Ohlone land, also known as El Cerrito. And Mabel?
Val here, she, her, experience and service designer at Rooted, along with translation. um, so that means I focused a lot of the conversations that I have with team members on stakeholder interviews, and yeah, that's one of the more interesting parts of things for me at Rooted. I am in Lenape land, so New York City.
Thanks, Val and Mabel. I'm glad to be here with you too. And I forgot to mention I'm in the Bay Area on Ohlone land, and our director of design designed these really cool Women's History Month graphics that you see behind me. So just wanted to shout her out as well here in spirit. And so as we create the space of belonging and come together in community, I just wanted to highlight a few of these. These are our community agreements, and this is the way that we want to show up and work with each other today. I'm not going to read them all. I'm going to give you time to sit with them and read through them. And if you need them, we will post, I think we have a link that we can post in the chat. If not, I'll go ahead and send that over later. But a few that we like to do, one of the things that we like to do is just elevate a few of them that we want to kind of embrace for today's conversation. And so I always like to start with take care of yourself and have fun, which is number 9. It's at the bottom of the list, but it's also the one that I feel like is always the most important in centering ourselves and our wellness. Another 2 more that I want to highlight is just approach with curiosity, being open to new ways of doing and thinking. We're going to talk about a lot of cool concepts, and we just want to make sure that we're showing up in that way. I also want to say to be aware of power dynamics and consider the space that you consume, especially when we break out into solution rooms. And then just ideating yes and embrace being messy and put aside perfectionism. Those are the ones that I wanted to highlight for today's conversation. And if you'd like to highlight any additional, any of these agreements or add any, feel free to put that in the chat as well. So at this time, I'm just going to go through a quick review of our agenda today. We're doing the welcome community agreements in the intro right now. We are going to move into a little conversation around our stakeholder feedback and developing goals. Then we're going to do a journal activity, talk about, we're going to discuss designing interview questions, and then move into our second journal activity, which will lead into our breakout and solution rooms. Then we'll have a little bit of time to share out with the larger group. And we'll move into closing and tools where we can share some resources. And so, Val, do you mind talking a little bit about some of our, our guiding principles and how we can best show up today?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So for those who have been in our workshops before, you're familiar with some of this, but we always like to bring up the Design Justice Network as well as the liberatory design process. If you don't think of yourself as a designer, now is the time. Really, anyone who is designing experiences for other people, if you're designing processes or structures, as well as, creating actual graphics, or building websites, or designing experiences as a development director. All of these different kinds of things makes you a designer. And so we really like to center the voices, of course, of those who are most impacted by the outcomes of the design processes that we're embarking on, as well as think about how fraught design can be with power and identity dynamics. And so before we get into our work for today, I just wanted to guide us through a little bit of a notice and reflect activity. We're not going to go through the entire thing that we often will do when we're working more one-on-one with groups, or that you might do in the connections cohort that we're doing, where we go a little bit more deeply into some of the topics that we're talking about here. But I'm going to put into the chat the liberatory design mindset cards. For those who haven't seen them before, they're really great to take a look at and really help center equity in our work, and give us questions to ask ourselves as we're designing different things. So at the beginning of any process, our team likes to, sit and think about our identities. What biases and assumptions might we be bringing into this time together? Think about power. What equity challenges am I navigating right now? Are there roles and power relationships from myself, my team, my community? What would help me see things more clearly? Then emotion and context. What feelings are present? What do I want to be aware of? Especially today, as we're thinking about stakeholder feedback, it can also be, overwhelming with different power dynamics. If you don't approach it in kind of the most equity centered way, it can certainly feel extractive to those that you're asking questions of. So, like, thinking about those kinds of feelings, and for yourself, sometimes it feels challenging to think about asking people questions and what questions to ask, and am I going to do it right and in a way that is building relationships. And so this last piece is around mindsets, and that's what the liberatory design deck is really great for, is how to set intention around the time that you're spending, intention around the community feedback process that you're designing. So I wanted to just highlight a couple of the cards from the liberatory design deck. And the first one here is about recognizing oppression, because it does show up in so many different forms around us and can often be so subtle. And so really learning to see how it's showing up in these different forms and the effect that it might be having, and notice how our own identities and positional power shape what we see and hear, and how we even frame the challenges that we're looking for answers around. The next one is about building relational trust. And this is what I sort of referred to a little bit at the beginning, is that the process of stakeholder feedback is really about building trust within your team, with your community members. It's an opportunity to be an empathetic listener and honor the stories of your community members and really invest in relationship with them in more intentional and authentic ways. And this last one is about attending to healing. And thinking about, people will get surveys all the time. One of the things we're going to encourage you all to do is to, provide some sort of money or appreciation or honorarium for those people that you're asking to provide you with feedback, and really honor their time. And oftentimes, through all of this, when stakeholder feedback processes aren't feeling inclusionary or intentional, it can have caused harm in the past. So it's really thinking about how you approach this in a way that will attend to the healing of the people that you're asking for information and experiences from. So now it's time to turn it over to you for a minute. And we're just going to keep this on screen for just about 2 minutes, and we'll be quiet so that people can just reflect and notice for yourselves. And then we'll move on to the next part of our work. Okay. Thank you so much for participating. Now we'll keep moving.
Yeah, and before we hop back into it, we've been on screen for exactly 20 minutes. So we'll take a quick, we like to call this our 2020, and every 20 minutes we'll try to look away from the screen, look out 20 feet in front of you. If you have a window, that's, obviously preferable. And just take 20 seconds to give your eyes a little break. Do some blinking and take some deep breaths. Do a little stretch if you need. Okay, thank you, everybody. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about stakeholder feedback. That's why everybody's here, hopefully. And we're going to discuss surveys, focus groups, stakeholder interviews. We're going to get a better idea of what community input is and how to make that how to do that in a more equitable sense. So I'm going to turn it over to Val and Mabel.
Right. So the first piece here is what format to choose. We focus on these three and decide how to use them in sort of different ways. So first, in terms of surveys, it's really about gaining broad audience insight, right? You can ask questions like we often will try to assess what people's values alignment are to an organization using surveys or what they're looking for from that organization. And then at the end, just as a rule of the road for us, we'll always ask people if they would be willing to engage in a focus group or a stakeholder interview so that, as we see across, sometimes we've done surveys where like thousands of people respond, we're able to at least get a group of people for focus groups or interviews that the organization might not know directly or might not have really close relationships with. The second one here is focus groups. This really allows more people to participate in a one-on-one experience, but it really needs a lot of, you need to be a good facilitator in order to get the information that you want out of a focus group, like making sure that everyone is having an equal time to share their experiences and that you don't try to ask too many questions, which is similar with surveys. Generally speaking, more than 10 questions, people are just not going to answer. And if you can do it in 5, try. And then the last one here is stakeholder interviews. We really will focus these on alignment to organization, sort of the emotional alignment more so than anything else. And this is the place where we really can get the most personal and deepest insights from an individual and be able to ask questions, keeping in mind to be careful and not lead the interviewee to the answers that you want them to say, because that's not what we're trying to do here. But gives you a chance to really listen and for them to really be heard. And it's the sort of most effective way to build that relational trust. So I'll hand it over to Mabel.
Yeah, and regardless of which format you choose, so you can you don't have to just do one format. You can do surveys and then do focus groups, then filter into stakeholder interviews. But regardless of what you choose, you want to think what is your own what is it that you want to get out of the questions that you're asking people. So you're starting thinking about yourself, thinking about kind of what Val mentioned earlier about your own biases. So what is it that you want to gain out of this? So something, and write it down is helpful. Reading it to others is helpful, but some that we have, some goals, questions, high level questions that we have in mind are, do people understand who you are and what you do? So you're spending a lot of time on marketing, on creating messages, on your name, your colors, everything. It's important to ask throughout, ask your community, how are they taking this in? So just having that goal in mind is important. Do they even know that the people that your target audience, do they even know you're creating items for them? Ideally, you're creating with them so that, yes, the answer is yes, they know that it's for them. But if they come across your material, do they even know it's for them? Or do they identify somebody else? That has happened when we're testing, for example, messages, and we think we wrote it out for a specific audience group, and or it's written out for a specific audience group, and then we're interviewing somebody that identifies with that group, and no, they think it's for somebody else, so it's not landing with them. Do people understand the breadth and depth of your work, of your mission? Can they explain what direct or indirect impact you have within your community? And that's an important goal, because you want them to talk about you. You want them to share that information with you, with other people, so that they trust, so that you build that relational trust with other people. Most of the people I trust are because I've spoken to somebody that I trust. And knowing that your community has that same, is able to speak about you in ways, is really helpful for you. So just having those goals in mind. These are not questions that you're asking them directly. So you're breaking those questions down differently for your audience, but it's just goals that you have in mind. You can even write down your answers so that you're checking your biases, thinking what you think people are going to answer for these.
Yeah, so similarly to what Mabel was just saying, is thinking about really what do you want to learn? What's important for your organization to glean from people, and what potential biases might be coming into play. So thinking about identities, thinking about the questions that you're asking people and why you're asking those questions. And oftentimes there can be different positional power dynamics that happen, right? Like you might have an executive director or a board member that wants you to ask a question that you really don't feel like you need the answer to. And I think the piece of that is thinking through, don't ask questions you already know the answer to, or that, like aren't sort of building on baseline knowledge, so that you're not, you want to just be careful to not like waste people's time on answers you could get somewhere else, right? Like if you did 5 minutes of research, could you find the answer to that online, you know, versus this is really trying to understand this individual real person's experience.
And then this is continuing on what is it you're trying to get out of it, as well as what the director of a space is actually asking you to get out of asking. So these are some example goals. Um, there's so many different ways to get at these different things, which is why we talked about surveys, focus groups, stakeholder interviews. The questions that you ask can get so, um, I guess there's so many different paths to take, even within the questions that you're asking. But just thinking about the goal helps you narrow that down. Um, the other part of it is that as you're speaking to people, other things come to mind to people. They react differently um, to your questions than you expected, even if you've practiced it, even if you've thought of all your biases. So knowing the goal that you want to focus on helps you know where to ask more questions, if it's an interview, especially where to dig in deeper. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Yeah, these are some sample.
Yeah, so we're gonna stop and do about 5 to 8 minutes. We'll see sort of how people are looking. But doing an individual writing and reflection time. So what are 3 to 5 goals you hope to achieve through stakeholder feedback? What do you hope to glean and understand? What format do you think will be the most effective for what you're hoping to find out? And what power or identity dynamics do you think you need to consider or be aware of? consider different equity challenges that might be existent in your team, in your system, in your community. And what do you need to consider? And this isn't meant to point fingers or make anyone feel bad. It's really about acknowledging and being aware and noticing what might be a dynamic that you need to consider. And that's the first step in making this a more effective and relational experience.
Okay, great. How's everybody doing? Everybody get a chance to finish their journal activity? Great. Well, let's put that aside for a quick second. What we're going to do is we're going to do a little stretch break now because it's been at least another 20 minutes, it feels like. So I'm going to stand up here for this because one of the most important things that we can do, we spend a lot of time on these, virtual screens and virtual spaces, but we want to make sure that we're moving our bodies, we're breathing. Take a second, look away from the screen, move. Oh, I heard a crack there. That just tells me that this was definitely necessary. And also just take a few breaths, close your eyes, and just inhale deep, exhale. And as you're doing that, just try to move your body a little bit. Like I said, stand up. If you need to step away from the computer for a second, do a little walk around the room or, over to the window. And one last deep breath in and exhale. Yeah, there you go. I see some people moving around. I love it. I love it. Okay. Feel a little rejuvenated. How's everybody feeling? Everybody's good? Can give a thumbs up or send an emoji. You know. Okay, great. Well, glad to be back into it. And we're gonna hop right back into the presentation then. And we'll have another one of these a little later, I believe, as well. And so what we're going to discuss now a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry, Mabel, I'm going to pass it over to you after. Well, I'll just tell them what they're going to be doing now. We're going to be designing the feedback and the feedback experience so that it's meaningful for our stakeholders. And what that just means is kind of, how you want this to, what the process is going to look like. And Mabel, I'll pass it back over to you.
No, that's good. You covered it. If we can go to the next one. Um, so we've gone over what you want out of the process. We've gone over a little bit what you're being asked for. So what maybe supervisors are asking for, maybe you're managing donors and what they're asking for. We've gone over you've thought about your biases and taken them into account, and um, now maybe now it's time to kind of make sure that this is meaningful, not just that it's meaningful, period. Because if it's meaningful to the stakeholder, it is meaningful to your own mission. It is meaningful to, like the time that you're spending is more meaningful. So that's where we'll focus in this slide. So the first thing is that we want you to center the feedback process on the perspective and the needs of your stakeholders and interviewees. You already know what you know. The goal is to now get information from other people outside of you, perspectives outside of you. So centering them or us um, really gives that really gives you, I mean, if you think about it just monetarily, it gives you more for your money because you already know what you know. So why not center other people now and get more information? But also it gets you closer to your mission. It helps people feel valued. So you're focusing on what they want now. You're putting aside everything or most things that you want. You're putting a focus on them before before you're meeting with them, you're doing your research, like Val mentioned. You don't want to spend time on questions that you already know the answer to, but you're also balancing that research, understanding that you're balancing what you find maybe online or in publications or whatever, wherever you're going to do your research with individuals. You're balancing those two ideas. Um, you're trying to not ask questions that you're not going to do anything with. Um, so keeping in mind that you're centering the per, uh, the respondents or the interviewees, the focus group participants, you're centering them. So if they're sharing something that doesn't feel totally aligned with your goal, you are meant to give them some space for that. Um, but the questions that you ask, they should all account for something that you actually need. And think about it in terms of valuing their time, in terms of valuing your time, um, in many aspects. And then as you're doing it, so many things come up. Sometimes, yeah, I mean, you're all probably working with missions that are deep, and so many things are connected. Sometimes you're talking with an interviewee, for example, about immigration, and as researchers, you might kind of take this like you might start getting detached about the topic for a second because you're taking on this researcher mindset. But it's a human. Everything that we're working on is a human. It's important as humans. So something might come up where it's emotional for them, it's emotional for you, and it's just important to acknowledge what's happening. And kind of put aside the goals sometimes and acknowledge what we're all feeling in that moment. Yeah, that's it. You can move on, Marcus. So a good quote that previous cohort participants shared: always remember to hold those that are dedicated to your organization close and give them a real seat at the table. So a real seat at the table. What that means is knowing what motivates them and what their needs are and compensating them for their time related to that motivation or their needs. So compensating them, ensuring that they feel valued, but also compensating them in other ways that Val mentioned earlier. Um, and keep in mind that those that are dedicated to your organization includes dedicated to the mission itself. So centering those most impacted. Um, so not just people that are participating in your activities, people that are donors, but those that are dedicated because they are impacted by the mission themselves. So who to approach for questions you're asking. So we've talked about a little bit about making sure that you're centering those most impacted by the mission. You're also taking into account internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. So sometimes we kind of forget that our community includes those that work in the organization, and it includes us. So talk to your coworkers, talk to on different levels, and as well as those that are outside of your community. And again, centering those most impacted. So not just donors. That's often happens because you want to continue your mission. You want to gain the donation in order to continue the work that you're doing. But without centering those most impacted, you're not really continuing the work that you that you really want to do. You're going to base the questions on your stated goals. It's a big dance there that you're going to do. And then you're considering who you are choosing to interview and what biases might come into play. Um, Examples come to mind, but I know we're thinking about time. But just remember that who you are as an individual might have an impact on the interviewee. So one example that comes to mind is somebody I was able to interview, and it wasn't until the end of that interview where I got the real answers from him. And I think me as a female was an impact, me as somebody that was working with their organization versus and he was an employee. So all of those things come into play when you're with an with that. So what we did at the time was give him the time that he needed. That was the immediate solution that we had at the time. Just keep asking, just keep giving him the time and hope and gaining his trust in order for him to understand that what he was sharing was not going to be shared exactly as he shared it, so that we could protect his job and his opinions still were valued and mattered. Hope that makes sense. And this goes, oh, you could go to the next one. Oh, it is. Okay, sorry. So this goes along with what I just mentioned. So before the interview, discuss who is the best person to speak to. We can't always match the interviewee to the interviewer or the facilitator to those that are being that are participating in a focus group. But we can do our best, and we can match it with different things like time, which I mentioned before. So just align that time. Um, and in that example, it's the same thing I mentioned earlier, where the person I was interviewing, he was worried about his job. He was also skeptical because he said these things before, and and didn't have an impact. Um, so it really took us uh, time. Time was the time, and kind of just um, being genuine was the thing that allowed him to share some of his um, thoughts. Yeah, and also kind of being vulnerable ourselves. So we share some ideas that we thought. We try to be not biased in the interviews. We try our best, but if we notice that there's something that the organization really wants to hear from and the interviewees are holding back from, then we have to kind of share ourselves with them in order to ensure that that they feel comfortable sharing back. And of course, confidentiality. So especially within interviews, but also, no, with all of them, with interviews, with surveys, those are the most confidential ones. Um, we are we usually we always tell the respondents or the interviewees how their information is going to be managed. So we ask them if it's okay to record. We let them know that that the information will be summarized and shared as a group without revealing who it came from, without saying any identifying identifiers. And if there are pieces in their responses, even if it's like something that's amazing that they shared, if there's something that they want to pull out of their summary, even though of their responses, even though it's going into a summary, if there's a fragment that they want to remove, we remove that, and we just use it as a way to do our own research afterwards. So that information isn't lost, but we just remove it, respecting that they know best how they want to handle their information.
Yeah, this is a lot of great information, Mabel. Thanks. I know it seems like probably so much, and there's so much, like you were saying, there's so much depth that we can go into. I've learned so much working with you on a lot of these different projects, and one of the things that I'm really grateful for is the resource that we're going to highlight for today, which is the Stakeholder Interview Guide, which provides a lot of structure and questions, sample questions. It's really just a beginner guide for how to build out the survey process, focus groups, stakeholder interviews. It'll give you context around what to do and a lot of the things that Mabel's talking about. Because even though some of them might seem like kind of, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's the process of it. We don't want to leave any parts of this out, and that's important to make it feel like a very equitable process. So we do have this resource. We'll share it in our both in our newsletter and our follow-ups from this, and I believe Val put it in the chat right now, the Dropbox link, so that you can download that and let us know how you like it. Let us know if you have any suggestions, and try using it and see how it works for you. Specifically, I wanted to also highlight page 31 of the guide, which talks a little bit more about the deeper structures and questions of how to develop your interviews, or your just your focal points of what Mabel was talking about in regards to making the questions feel accessible to everybody. And so that kind of leads us into our second journal activity. We're going to take a quick second and think about how can you use community feedback to build connection and belonging. One of the things that I've gathered from even hearing Val and Mabel speak, and this is a continuation, remember, if you were at our last workshop, our last roundtable, community roundtable, specifically, we talked about values and audience mapping, and that leads right into the work that we're doing here. So what we want to really understand is, how can you center your audiences? How can you build this process for feedback and really center connection and belonging in that? So considering things like language and framework, the things that fit to your context. So asking yourself, who will be included in this process? What are their lived experiences? And how can you frame the questions to make them feel both connected and belonged in the space and make them feel comfortable? So we'll take about, Mabel, you think about 5 to 8 minutes again? Yes, Nadia brought it up in the chat too. I wanted to let everybody know that we do have the recording from the last roundtable. It will be on our YouTube soon. And also it will be, I'll share it in the follow-ups from this meeting as well. And it's also a good thing if you want to join the cohort and get access to additional information and conversations. So for the deep dive. We'll take about 5 to 8 minutes here. I'll put on some music, and feel free to just take some time and answer these questions for yourself. And then we'll kind of lead that into our breakout rooms. Okay. Sorry to cut a little short here on the journal activity, but I do want to make sure that we get into the solution rooms and people are able to connect. Before we do that, we're going to do a quick little 2020 here, just to make sure that we're giving our eyes a little break and a little rest here. So once again, we're going to take 20 seconds. You can feel free to count. And we're just going to look 20 feet away for 20 seconds. And we try to do this again every 20 minutes. Okay. Okay. And just before we get into our breakout groups, we call them solution rooms. A reminder of our community agreements. Please be aware of time. We're going to take about 20 minutes to get into these. And then we're going to focus on the questions that we'll provide in just a second, but feel free to have a more open conversation and whatever's feeling present at the time. Be ready to engage with other participants, and we'll try to come around and check in on you if you need any help or any guidance. If any of the above doesn't happen, feel free to return to the main room, and we can work out and sort out the groups further. And so for today's solution rooms, these are just suggested questions. Of course, starting with introducing yourself, your organization, your accessibility needs and pronouns. But then we're going to just kind of reconnect around those initial journal activities. So what are the 3 to 5 goals you hope to accomplish through your own process for stakeholder feedback, and discussing things like the power dynamics and potential biases that might come into play here, and how do we build connection and belonging with our interviewees. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to, not turn it over, but Val, if you're available, I think we can get into these breakout rooms so people have some time to talk and, again, just discuss these questions.
Yeah, I have one question. There are two
Sure.
Brees on the line. Are you the same Bree and just have 2 logins? Just so I put you in the same room.
I think
There are
there's 2
two. Okay,
Brees.
there are actually
So.
2 Brees. Okay, just making sure.
2 Brees, a couple
Okay.
Caitlins.
Okay, just making sure, because sometimes they aren't spelled exactly the same. So,
Yeah.
okay, hold
Great
on.
question.
Wait. Okay, there we go. All right, now we're ready.
Okay.
Here
We
we
will
go.
see you all back here in 20 minutes, and then we'll do a quick closing. Thanks. Val, do you want to pause the recording?